I didn't expect such a surprise from an elderly man, but I was pleased that my name is Dorothy and I'm 62 years old. I've been working at Miller's Diner for the past 15 years, serving coffee and pie to the same familiar faces day after day. It's honest work, and I've always taken pride in remembering how everyone likes their eggs and whether they take cream in their coffee. Robert started coming in about 3 months ago. He was one of those distinguished-looking gentlemen with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkle at the corners when he smiles. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, he'd sit a corner booth by the window, always ordering the same thing: black coffee, wheat toast, and a side of fresh fruit. We'd exchange pleasantries, of course. The weather, how business was going. Nothing deep, just the comfortable small talk that fills the spaces between pouring coffee and taking orders. But I noticed things about him. The way he always left a generous tip, even though his order was simple. How he'd thank me by name every single time. The fact that he never seemed to be in a rush, even though most folks my age are always checking their watches or their phones. One Thursday morning in late September, Robert came in looking a bit more tired than usual. His smile was still there, but it seemed to take more effort. I poured his coffee and asked if everything was all right. He looked up at me with those gentle eyes and said something I wasn't expecting. He told me his wife had passed away 2 years ago, and these visits to the diner were the highlight of his week. He said my kindness reminded him that there was still warmth in the world. I didn't know what to say at first. I just stood there holding that coffee pot, feeling my throat get tight. Here I thought I was just doing my job, being polite like my mama taught me, and it meant something more to someone. I sat down across from him for just a moment. The morning rush hadn't started yet, and my manager was in the back. I told Robert I was sorry for his loss, and that I looked forward to his visits too. It was the truth. In a job where faces blur together after so many years, his consistent kindness stood out. We talked for maybe 10 minutes that morning. He told me about his wife, Eleanor, and how they'd been married for 41 years. How she loved to bake pumpkin bread every fall, and how the whole house would smell like cinnamon and nutmeg. How they'd take long walks in the evening, not really going anywhere in particular, just being together. I shared a bit about myself too. How I'd been divorced for 20 years and had raised my 2 boys on my own. How they were grown now with families of their own, living in different states. How I sometimes felt like life had passed by faster than I could keep track of. After that morning, something shifted. Our conversations grew longer, deeper. Robert would time his visits for the slower periods, and we'd talk about books we'd read, places we'd been, memories that made us laugh and others that made us pause and reflect. He told me one day that he'd been thinking about taking a trip to see the autumn leaves up north, something he and Eleanor had always planned but never got around to doing. I mentioned I always wanted to see Vermont in the fall, but never had anyone to go with. The invitation came quietly, almost shyly. Would I perhaps want to join him? Just as friends, he added quickly. Separate rooms, no expectations. Just 2 people who enjoyed each other's company, taking a trip to see something beautiful. I surprised myself by saying yes. We went the second week of October. Robert drove, and we took our time, stopping at little towns along the way. We stayed at a small bed and breakfast run by a lovely couple who'd been married even longer than Robert and Eleanor had been. Walking through those Vermont hills, surrounded by trees ablaze with red and gold and orange, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not romance exactly, though there was a tenderness between us. It was more like companionship in its truest form. 2 people who'd lived full lives, experienced loss and joy, and found comfort in simply being present with each other. One evening, we sat on the porch of the bed and breakfast, wrapped in blankets against the cool October air. Robert reached over and took my hand. Not in a passionate way, but in a way that said, I'm here and I'm grateful you're here too, Dot. He told me then about the moment he'd first walked into Miller's Diner, how he'd been feeling so alone, wondering if the rest of his life would just be empty days strung together, and how my simple act of refilling his coffee with a genuine smile had reminded him that connection was still possible. I confessed that I'd been feeling the same way, that my boys loved me but had their own lives, and I'd started to wonder if my purpose was just to keep working until I couldn't anymore. Robert squeezed my hand gently and said something I'll never forget. He said that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the smallest packages. A kind word, a moment of attention, the willingness to see another person and let them see you. When we returned home, nothing dramatic changed. Robert still came to the diner on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but now we also went to movies on Sunday afternoons. We'd have dinner at each other's homes. We'd call each other just to share something funny or interesting that happened during the day. My boys noticed the change in me when they called. They said I sounded happier, lighter. When they finally met Robert during Thanksgiving, they pulled me aside and told me they were glad I'd found a friend. Friend. That word means so much more at our age than it did when we were young. It's not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It's about showing up, about listening, about caring enough to remember the small details that make someone who they are. Robert and I have been in each other's lives for a year now. We're planning another trip this fall, maybe to the coast this time. We talk about the future in careful, hopeful ways. Neither of us knows how many years we have left, but we've both learned that's not really the point. The point is that kindness matters, that it's never too late to let someone in, that loneliness doesn't have to be permanent, and that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't the passionate ones from our youth, but the gentle, steady ones we find when we're wise enough to appreciate them. I look at Robert now, and I think about how close I came to spending the rest of my life just going through the motions. And I'm grateful every single day that he walked into that diner and that I had the sense to see the gift that his presence was. Love at our age is different. It's quieter, but it's no less real. And sometimes it's exactly what we need.